Hey, John Gilroy here. Did you know that there are some technology systems in the federal government that are 50 years old? What could possibly go wrong? Hit the music, Manny. Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, the podcast that connects you to federal technology leaders. In the virtual studio today is Nilanjan Sengupta. He's the Senior Vice President and Head of Thoughtworks Federal. So a lot of old systems out there, huh, Nilanjan?
Yes, there are, John.
So in the next 25 minutes, we're going to take every single system in the federal government and boil it down to two easy ways to modernize it for $5 or less. I mean, this is such a huge problem. You know, your screen here's got a bunch of mountains on it. I think this is the biggest mountain in your background. I mean, this is a mountain that many agencies face, isn't it? Legacy modernization.
Yes, they are facing that. And I would start with a quote. And the quote says, "If you stop this after the pilot, I would not know how to survive."
Yeah.
That's what a Veterans Affairs primary care provider told us during our AI ambient scribe pilot. Mm-hmm. Not a technology reaction, John. It's a mission reaction.
Yeah.
A clinician telling you that AI just gave them back their ability to be a doctor, to look a veteran in the eye instead of staring at a screen. That's the kind of outcome we are chasing in every federal engagement. And it is the lens through which I want to answer these questions today.
Well, and that's it. It's not bits and bytes or routers or data centers. It's what is the federal mission for a health agency, for a finance agency. And so if a technology, whether it's good or bad, can enable that, well, fine, but we're going to test it and find out. I like the word ambience. It sounds like let's look at your AI ambience and see if it can help your mission. It seems like a better approach than just boiling it down to throwing chairs and arguing about storage requirements. And you've done that. I've heard that plenty with people.
Yes.
So mission enabler with the VA. And so what happened is somehow you folks managed to help modernize their system and found they could use tools to help people. Is that what your statement's saying, huh?
Yeah. And honestly, the first thing I tell any leaders in the federal agencies is just stop calling it modernization. The word itself is the problem. Yeah. It signals a tech project. It's not, it is a mission project. What we are really talking about is removing the barriers between your agency and the people it serves. When you frame it that way, the conversation completely changes. The question I ask every C-suite we sit down with is simple. What is the citizen experience that your legacy system is actively blocking right now? Start there, not with the technology, with the human, but with the human on the other end of it, So again, going back to my Veterans Affairs, the clinicians were spending 10 to 20 minutes per patient just on documentation, often staying 2 or more hours after their shift to finish compiling notes. That is not a tech debt problem. That's a mission failure. Veterans weren't getting their providers' full attention. Providers were burning out. The system worked technically, but was failing humanly, right? So we came in as the EHR, Electronic Health Record Integration Partner, and built the APIs that connected 2 different AI ambient scribe vendors, Average and Notex, directly into the Vista Mount system, that is the Veterans Affairs Legacy EHR. We did not replace Vista, right? Mm-hmm. We extended it. We built a FHIR-compliant, FHIR-compliant wrapper around a decades-old system and opened it up to modern AI tooling, running on AWS GovCloud with full ATO compliance. So what is the result that we achieved, right? Providers are going home on time with all their notes written. Patient satisfaction scores went up. One pilot site saw 86% of primary care providers voluntarily adopt the tool within weeks. That's what mission-driven modernization looks like. You measure it in veteran outcomes, not server migrations. Before you spend $1 on modernization, map your legacy systems to citizen journeys. If a system is blocking a human outcome, a veteran getting care, a family getting benefits, etc., that's your starting point. That's where you build your business case.
Many people build the business case on the amount of money they spend on maintaining older systems. And I've talked with enough healthcare providers and people in HIMSS to know that Vista can clear a room quickly if you stand up in a chair and say, I'd like to talk about Vista. Everyone's going to leave that room and go look for the baseball game on TV or something. It's really, really frustrating. Now, the problem is, in some ways, it works, but there's this whole thing. I was just thinking of if I took my car in to get a new battery in it, and Ralph over there puts a battery in, and he spends 10 minutes in the battery and 2 hours documenting what he opened up car, turned bolt left, then another bolt, placed battery. That you couldn't run a business that way. But that's what's happened. I mean, I think people here know what goes on in a typical doctor's office, and we can see that happening, can't we?
Yeah, you're right.
This is the Federal Tech Podcast, and if you say federal, you got to say security in the same sentence. So what about security considerations in enhancing or migrating or updating existing systems?
Yeah, I mean, it is a balance between risk, cost, and continuity. And here is the honest truth. The agencies that get into trouble are the ones that treat this as a binary choice. You replace everything or you touch nothing. Both of those paths fail. The real answer is that different parts of the same system deserve different strategies. And the mission stakes, how high or how low it is, right? It determines which is which. So we categorize workloads into 3 buckets. System of record that must never fail. You extend them, not replace them. Systems of differentiation where modernization creates mission advantage. That's where you modernize aggressively. And finally, systems of innovation where you can move fast and experiment. That's where you take risks. The mission stakes of each workload tell you which bucket it belongs in. So for the VA, again, going back to the example of running Vista, one of the most complex healthcare IT environments in the world, if you think about it, serving 9 million enrolled veterans across 1,380 facilities. You cannot take that system down. You cannot run a risky parallel replacement. Downtime is genuinely not an option here. So our approach was a strangler fig pattern applied to a live federal healthcare system. What do I mean by strangler fig? We do not touch Vista's core. We built new APIs at the edge. One of the hardest problems in the project was this. The AI scribe vendors are off-premise on the cloud, but Vista lives behind the VA firewall. There was no existing pathway to exchange credentials securely. So we engineered a front end to service token exchange that threaded that needle, giving external vendors access to exactly what they needed and nothing more. That's the crux of security in action, right? And here is the compounding benefit nobody talks about when they think about incremental modernization. By building a FHIR-compliant integration layer, we didn't just solve the scribe problem, we opened the door for every FHIR-compliant integration at the Veterans Affairs. One modernization investment, compounding returns, if it is done right. That's the kind of outcome you can only get when you resist the temptation to do everything at once,
Yeah. I am trying to resist the temptation to talk about the word strangler because I'm afraid if this goes on YouTube, we may be banned for YouTube for life because can't say that word. It's nothing to do with what, the mystery movie on TV or something, but a strangler method or strangler pattern. People know about that. I was on LinkedIn this morning and I read David Linthicum all the time. And this is a great observation. He said, hey, everyone's jumping into AI this and AI that and making these mistakes and making these things. So what people are forgetting is about the system of record.
Yes.
I mean, what you have to have a system of record. Then old John can go play in that sandbox and do whatever stupid things he wants because the system of record's not going to be altered because of hallucinations and all kinds of problems with AI. And so I'm glad you started off with the system of record. I'm writing down and go, well, finally, I mean, Dave Linthicum has beat up and knocked around for 30 years in this business. And Nilanjan, you're a lot younger, but yes, let's not mess with what we have, get the original documents and the data. And maybe it is even good data, but still it's a system of record that, especially with medical records, because this is a life and death decision you're doing with it, isn't it?
Yep.
Good.
Absolutely.
So my question is this. We apply AI to this problem, and there are some, say, concerns with existing systems. Let's call them challenges. One challenge might be the system may resist integration. That sounds like an AI being. They may resist integration, maybe like a stubborn dog, resist integration. The data on the existing system is fragmented. We know that.
Yeah.
And just because you accomplish the transition effectively doesn't mean there's going to be bottlenecks. And so let's go 1, 2, 3. Systems are out there resisting. It's like resisting eating your vegetables, So how do you handle a system that just is ornery and, they've been around for 30 or 50 years, I start off with. I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, I think it goes to the root of yes, technology has advanced tremendously, but how do you really apply a technology like AI to untangle the legacy complexity, right?
Right.
And I get asked this question a lot, and my answer is always the same. AI is ready to help. The question is whether the architecture around it is ready. The data sovereignty, the data permissions, the data layout, and the master data records that you're talking about, are they ready, right? Capability is not the limiting factor in federal environments. Trust infrastructure is, right? And trust infrastructure is something you build deliberately. Let me tell you what that looks like in practice, because we just did that in the Veterans Affairs. We deployed AI inference entirely within the AWS Cloud environment, US Gov East. So data never left the federal boundary. We used OpenTelemetry and Datadog for full observability, every API call traced, every model interaction logged. We implemented OAuth with Veterans Affairs' own OCC authentication system, so access was controlled at the identity layer, not just the network perimeter. Every one of those decisions was made specifically to answer the trust question before anybody asked it. The most important safeguard, though, isn't technical, it's procedural. At the Veterans Affairs, AI-generated clinical notes went through clinician review before being committed to the EHR. That human-in-the-loop checkpoint isn't bureaucratic overhead. It's the mechanism that makes the system trustworthy enough for a provider to say, I would not know how to survive without this. They trust it because they control the final step. For federal CIOs evaluating AI-assisted legacy analysis, whether that's code understanding, dependency mapping, or documentation generation, the same principles apply. Require that AI outputs be traceable to source artifacts, integrate validation gates into your CI/CD pipelines, and treat AI-generated outputs as working drafts until confirmed by subject matter experts within your agency. That framing aligns naturally with federal security culture and makes the ATO conversation significantly easier. And that's how you should use AI judicially to untangle the legacy risks.
There's a podcast in town I listen to called Feds at the Edge. And many times agencies have a problem just identifying where are all the sensors? Where are all the endpoints? And when I think about data, we can apply that to the VA, say, well, how do you find all the data that's out there? There could be nooks and crannies. So do you have a discovery process for finding fragmented data or, data that may be in two different locations?
We believe in data mesh principles that we pioneered a few years ago. And data mesh basically gives the control back to the data owners. So the owners, the producers of the data control their own data. And they also control the way that data is shared with the rest of the enterprise. So it is about operationalizing a responsible AI, responsible data environment, if you will. It's a very simple example, right? If your responsible AI strategy lives in a PDF, it isn't a strategy, it's a hope, right?
PDF is not a strategy. You can write that down.
Right. And it has to be governed, but real governance has to be enforced at the point where decisions are made, which means it has to live inside your engineering pipeline.
So is that the
When
word
you get a product.
so it's federated? Is that the word you'd
It
use?
is federated,
Okay.
it is governed, it has to be very well governed and very well facilitated across the enterprise. Because your first, the way you started the question is how do you find this data, right? If it is still federated,
Yes.
really, how do you exactly find that? So there has to be a really well governed data discovery, data definition step that makes that data discoverable, right? Explainable. And also the quality of the data has to be, it's kind of like in an app store, right? You are saying 5 star for an app. Like that data quality has to be um, treated like that. Like others have to weigh in, like how much value they got out of the data. So that's how I would say that you organize your entity because we tried data centralizing data, and the fact of the matter is even if you have the best techniques to put all of your data in a data lake or a data warehouse, many people may not show up with that data. They may not trust that environment because it's not managed by them. Why will I put my secure data, private data in somebody else's managed, even if it is within the same agency? So many people didn't come. And if you are missing data elements and data domains are not participating in your centralized data, then you lose that value of that data store. So therefore, distributed data is where we find the most traction, and that's where AI ready, AI readiness is also measured on how quickly you can access data in the most meaningful way.
So can we summarize it by saying domain, not data lake? Focus
Yeah,
on the domain because that's
yeah,
where you discover it.
exactly,
You know.
exactly.
There are a lot of people who make proposals of changing a system. And the problem with the federal government is that it's one thing to do Joe's Donuts in Chicago, but the federal systems have to be secure, compliant, and sustainable.
Yeah.
And so is that part of the checklist? I mean, it has to be, especially with, personal information, medical information you're dealing with here. And so you can assure the end user that the information will be secure. Again, I guess it's because it's in the AWS platform to begin with. So it's got that big wall around it to begin with, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And the way I explain, this to our leaders is simple. If your responsible AI strategy lives in a PDF, it isn't a strategy. It's a hope, right? Again, um, we want to make it an engineering discipline, right? All this governance, all this responsibility of managing and maintaining your data. So that's the shift we help our agencies make from responsible AI as a compliance posture to responsible AI as an engineering practice. So going back to the Veterans Affairs, we work directly with the Office of the CTO, Office of the Chief AI Officer, and the VA Digital Health Office, three separate governance stakeholders. Before a single line of integration code was written, right? We started working with them. We conducted on-site discovery at the San Francisco VA Medical Center, specifically focused on provider and veteran buy-in. Responsible AI at the VA wasn't a checkbox for us. It was the sequencing of the entire project. So governance in this case, in this illustration, right, it came first. And that's why the clinical community trusted it fast enough to hit 86% adoption at the Kansas City site within weeks of go live. The concrete practices we built in, like structured logging at every API boundary for auditability, token scoped access so AI vendors could only touch the specific data their workflow required. And that's also based on the data product, data mesh example that I told you. And a write back architecture where AI generated notes were staged for clinician review before EHR commit. That staged review process is that model approval workflow in a healthcare context adapted for the mission, right? So for agencies building this out more broadly, map your responsible AI practices, I would say, to the NIST AI RMF categories. build an AI risk register that your CISO and your mission owner can both read and own jointly, and treat your continuous delivery pipeline as the enforcement mechanism for your governance policy. OMB gives you the mandate, but engineering discipline gives you the execution.
There is a phrase I normally associate with a lot of federal agencies. I've interviewed people from National Labs, Idaho, and they're pretty risk averse because they maybe deal with some, let's say, atomic stuff, and they're careful about that. And I think the people I have interviewed and talked to dealing with healthcare data, especially veterans' healthcare data, and especially if they are a vet, they're going to be very risk averse to, hey, Nilanjan's got this idea. Oh, it's always done. We've always done it this way. And this is information for people who have surgery next week. And we just can't go toss. We have to, I think the phrase would be a risk-based prioritization for this transition. Yes. And somehow the magic sauce yielded the 86% figure, which many listeners are going to go, 86%? Really? Is there a dot supposed to be in there? 8.6? Really? 86% of veteran medical people who worried and concerned about their patients, they jumped in? Hey, the water's fine. Nilanjan says, so they really did it. This is the trust barrier, I think. This is really the
trust architecture, yes.
You started this in the beginning, but it's a trust barrier, and it's I guess it's almost what's the word? Maybe to convince people that you have made consideration of the risk involved and you have anticipated, like for example, fragmented data. Look, we've worried about fragmented data. We've worried about bottlenecks. We've worried about, the system resisting us. And it's just, I think that's the headline here. Really? Some people are going to be shocked. I was.
I think data strategy has to be the foundation for AI. Right. I always tell CDOs the same thing at the start. Don't talk about AI until you have answered 3 questions. Can your data be found? Can it be trusted? And does anyone actually own that data? If the answer to any of those is no, your AI initiative is going to hit a wall. And it's going to hit it at the worst possible moment after you have already made commitments. So let me break it down a little bit. So for the ambient scribe work, for move 1, the architecture part, right? The VS clinical appointments data and the EHR data lived in Vista behind the firewall in formats that external AI vendors could not consume. So that was very clear from the very beginning. Like you said, privacy, conversation happening between a patient and a doctor, super confidential. So our first architectural move was building a FHIR R4 compliant API layer, a standard data interface that made VA clinical data accessible to AI tools without exposing the underlying system. We sent data, only the data that is required for the tool to, operate. That's the foundational move for any agency. Make your data accessible in standard interoperable formats and make it sensitive and make it context-based before you try to do anything with AI on top of it. Don't start with the AI model. Start with the data interface. That is move 1 architecture. Move 2 is the governance. At the VA, data governance wasn't a manual approval process. It was enforced at the infrastructure layer, like AWS GovCloud, the OAuth mechanism, SSL, TLSs, the scoped API access. So it was enforced at the infrastructure layer. The AI vendors could retrieve appointments for a given provider and submit encounter summaries, nothing else. They couldn't.
So it's almost like, remember the phrase role-based access control?
Role-based, attribute-based.
That's what it is. It's data role-based access control.
Right. That's actually what we call computational governance, right? Security and compliance built into the platform, not managed by a ticketing system.
Yeah.
And last, but the most important aspect is the culture aspect. This is the hardest one. The VA project succeeded because the CTO's office, the chief AI officer, and the digital health office all treated this as a clinical transformation initiative, not an IT project. The metric wasn't API uptime. It was provider satisfaction and veteran engagement quality. That's the cultural shift every CDO needs to drive. Data as a product that serves a mission, not a byproduct of IT operations. So for CDOs just starting, pick one mission critical data set, assign an informal product owner, prove the model, then scale. You don't need to architect everything on day one. You need one proof point that the organization can see and believe in.
Yeah, well, it's a great story. I'd like to dive into this more, especially the psychological aspects of it. But there's a whole lot there that you didn't, walking in realize that, well, hey, we got these humans here. It's a tough one. We'll have to come back and revisit this. I think this is a great story. The 86%, the transition, I think it's going to be a story that needs to be told for other agencies who are thinking about this with not as critical information, maybe more critical. The people in different labs have critical information, but this is a lesson to be learned for, I think, commercial organizations as well. And unfortunately, Nilanjan, we are running out of time here.
Okay.
If you want more information, I can put it in the show notes, direct to the thoughtworks.com, and they can look for case studies there. I'm sure you have case studies based on this, huh?
Yes, I do. We do.
Good. Put one up there. I'd like to thank our guest today, Nilanjan Sengupta, Senior Vice President and Head of ThoughtWorks Federal, and you have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast.
Thank you.